Every intelligence service on Earth shares one weakness, and it is not the one you would guess. It is not betrayal. It is not encryption. It is that a service can only see the world through the infrastructure it has captured, and infrastructure belongs to somebody else. Somewhere outside Tel Aviv, in a building that appears on no municipal register, a man we will call Cyril ran the Lebanon desk. That is not his name. His name has never been published, and this channel is not going to invent one and present it as fact. But the chair existed, the decisions attributed to him were made by someone sitting in it, and the consequences of those decisions are visible in the public record even where the man is not. Something for you before we go further, since you clearly cannot get enough of stories like these. Our limited edition ebook goes through the recruitment cycle case by case, the counterintelligence methods that have destroyed Israeli networks, and what happened to the people left behind in each one. Scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description. Then stay with us. This story is just getting started. Cyril had been on the Lebanon file since the late 1990s. He came out of a generation that grew up professionally inside the occupation of the South, and he had inherited a working belief that his predecessors held for 20 years, which was that Lebanon could be entered in a way that Syria and Iran could not. That belief was not arrogance. It was structural analysis, and it was correct. Lebanon had a weak central state, 18 recognized confessional communities, a history of militias funded from 4 different capitals, a diaspora with permanent reason to travel, and an economy in which a man receiving money from an unclear source was not remarkable to anyone. Every one of those features is a recruitment surface. A service working in a country like that does not need brilliance. It needs patience, and it needs decades, and Cyril's desk had both. By the second half of the 2000s, he was responsible for something that no Israeli officer before him had possessed at that depth. Not a source, not a defector, a network. Dozens of people, placed across ministries and municipalities and ports and companies, some of them in position since before the withdrawal, none of them aware of the others. The thing you need to understand before anything else in this story is that the network was not badly built. It was built superbly, by careful people, over 15 years, using methods that had been refined against one of the most security-conscious adversaries in the world. Hold that thought, because it is going to matter more than any mistake anyone makes later. There is a phrase used inside services for the moment when a case officer stops feeling like a visitor in a country and starts feeling like a resident. It is not a compliment. It describes the point at which the environment has become comfortable enough that the officer's instincts stop firing at things that should still frighten him. By 2007, Cyril's desk was resident in Lebanon. To understand what Cyril was actually running, you have to abandon the image the word Mossad puts in your head. There were not 30 Israelis moving through Beirut. There were never going to be. The network was Lebanese almost entirely, and that single fact governs everything that follows in this file. The people in it were a telecommunications engineer, a man with access to port manifests, a woman with a cousin in a municipal records office, a customs clerk, a driver who worked for a company that leased vehicles to people who did not want to buy them. They were unremarkable by design, because remarkable people cannot be run for 15 years. They had families in Tyre and Sidon and the southern suburbs of Beirut. They had children in Lebanese schools. They had reasons for what they did that were mostly financial and occasionally sectarian and almost never ideological, because ideology is unreliable and money is not. Here is the asymmetry that sits underneath this entire story, and it is worth saying plainly at the start rather than discovering it at the end. If a network like this is discovered, the service loses an operation. The people in it lose everything they have and everyone they know. An Israeli officer who is exposed goes home. A Lebanese asset who is exposed has no home to go to, because home is the place that wants him dead. Every person Cyril recruited was told, in some form, that there was a way out if it ever came to that. Every officer who says that sentence knows it is conditional. The way out requires knowing where the person is, having time to move, and operating in a country where a border can be crossed. None of those conditions can be guaranteed in advance, and all three can disappear in an afternoon. That promise, made dozens of times across 15 years, is the first debt this operation took on. Nobody recorded it as a liability. It does not appear in any budget. It came due anyway. Now, the crown jewel, the single most valuable thing Israeli intelligence acquired in Lebanon during this period, was not a source inside Hezbollah. It was a man inside the phone company. In 2010, Lebanese authorities arrested Sharbel Qazi, a senior engineer at the mobile operator Alpha, and charged him with spying for Israel. Weeks later, they arrested a second telecom engineer, Tariq Rabah. Al Jazeera, reporting on the period, identified Lebanon's telecommunications network as one of the country's most vulnerable infiltration targets, which is a mild way of describing what it actually was. Set aside the arrests for now. Go back to when the placement was working and consider what a man in that chair gives you. Lebanon runs on mobile phones. The fixed-line infrastructure is patchy and always has been, damaged by war and neglect and rebuilt inconsistently, so the country's entire nervous system, commercial, personal, political, and operational, sits on two cellular carriers. A senior engineer inside one of them is not a source who reports what he hears. He is a permanent window into the movement of an entire population. Which numbers call which numbers. Where a handset physically is, at any moment, because a handset speaks to a tower, whether or not a human being is speaking into it. When a new number appears inside an existing cluster. When an old number goes silent. For a service trying to map a decentralized organization like Hezbollah, that access is close to decisive. The senior cadre avoided phones and always had. But an organization of that size cannot function on discipline alone at every level. Drivers use phones. Logistics men use phones. The cousin who owns the warehouse uses a phone constantly. And the pattern of the periphery describes the shape of the center, if you have the patience to sit with it. This is where the second unresolved risk enters, and it is the one nobody at the desk was positioned to see. The value of that access was so high that it began to change how the human side of the operation was run. When you can watch a country's communications in real time, certain old habits start to look like superstition. You stop building elaborate multi-stage contact procedures, because you can simply check whether an unusual concentration of handsets has gathered near a meeting point. You stop agonizing over whether an asset is under surveillance, because you can look and see. Technical superiority does not just add capability to an operation. It quietly dissolves the habits that existed to compensate for not having it. Nobody at Serral's desk decided to relax tradecraft. There was no meeting where that was proposed. It happened the way erosion happens, one defensible decision at a time, each of them justified by the same sound reasoning, which was that the ground could be seen and therefore did not need to be walked as carefully. Meetings began recurring at locations that had worked before. Contact schedules settled into rhythms. Handsets meant to be used once were used twice, because replacement costs money and time and creates a signature of its own. Assets who were meant to be sealed away from each other developed a vague awareness of one another, because in a country run on personal relationships, perfect compartmentation is exhausting and its value is invisible right up until the day it is the only thing that matters. Every one of those changes passed a review. Every one was correct on the day it was made. In July of 2006, all of it paid off. During the war that summer, Israeli forces struck locations inside Lebanon that Hezbollah had never listed anywhere. Reached individuals in places chosen precisely because they were unremarkable, and demonstrated a depth of targeting knowledge that the organization had not believed possible. Hezbollah's leadership came out of that ceasefire with a problem it could not name, and it asked itself a question afterwards that most organizations never think to ask. Not who betrayed us, something far more dangerous than that. The question Hezbollah asked after the ceasefire was not, "Who betrayed us?" That is the amateur question, and it produces purges, confessions extracted from frightened men, and a list of names that has almost no relationship to reality. The question the organization's counterintelligence apparatus asked instead was narrower and infinitely more dangerous. What information would somebody need in order to do to us what was just done, and where in this country does that information physically live? There is exactly one honest answer to that question, and it is not a person. It is the phone network. This is the pivot of the entire story, and it happens 4 years before anyone on the Israeli side registers that anything has changed. In 2006, Sorel's desk recorded a success and banked it. In the same season, on the other side of a border, a small group of analysts recorded a hypothesis and quietly funded it. Consider what that hypothesis required of them. It required accepting that the enemy was already inside their communications and would remain inside them for the duration of the investigation. It required continuing to lose people while they worked. It required years of analytic labor with no product, no arrests, and nothing to show a leadership that wanted results. Most organizations cannot do this. The pressure to act on the first name you are certain of is close to irresistible, and acting on the first name is how you warn the other 29. The method they developed has been described in general outline in open sources, including analysis published by the Combating Terrorism Center at West Point, which traced Hezbollah's counterintelligence campaign across a decade. The escalation curve in that record is the tell. A 12-person ring uncovered in March 2001, a 3-person ring in 2002, 4 individuals indicted in 2004. Those are small numbers, and small numbers come from ordinary counterintelligence. Somebody talks, somebody is followed, somebody spends money he cannot explain. Then the numbers change category entirely, sweeps measured in dozens, and eventually, according to Al Jazeera's reporting on the period, as many as 70 suspected spies arrested by Lebanese authorities across 2009 and 2010 alone. You do not get from 12 to 70 by getting luckier. You get there by finding a method, and a method that produces numbers like that does not run on informants. It runs on data. Here is the reconstruction, built from what has been reported and from what the arrest pattern mathematically demands rather than from any source that has confirmed the internal detail. You begin by assuming your adversary is inside the phone network. You cannot verify that, because you do not control the network. So, you invert the problem. You stop looking for the intruder and you start looking for the shape their presence forces on the behavior of the people they run. Instead of hunting spies, you hunt the negative space around spies. A normal Lebanese phone is chaotic. It calls a mother, it calls a brother, it calls the same 20 numbers in unpredictable order, it wanders across 3 neighborhoods in a week. It sends messages at 1 in the morning, it goes to a wedding and generates 40 contacts in an afternoon. An operational handset does none of that. It calls very few numbers. It stays silent for long stretches. It activates in one location and dies afterwards. It never, at any point in its existence, calls somebody's mother. Discipline is a signature. The precise qualities that make a communications device operationally secure make it statistically bizarre in a dataset of 4 million ordinary lives. Then you cross-reference. You take every handset that displayed anomalous discipline over 18 months, and you ask where those handsets were physically standing, and when. And you look for coincidence between devices that have no social connection to each other whatsoever. 2 disciplined handsets in the same calf in Jonah, in the same 40-minute window, on 3 separate occasions across 8 months, belonging to 2 people with no reason on earth to know each other, is not a coincidence. It is a meeting. And now you have 2 people instead of 0. And once you have 2 people, you have every other person either of them has ever met under the same conditions. The network unrolls the way a knitted garment unrolls. Nothing for a long time, and then a thread, and then all of it. They did not need to break Israeli encryption. They did not need to recruit an Israeli. They needed telecommunications data, which the Lebanese state held, and which a movement with ministers and cabinet could obtain, and they needed analysts willing to spend 3 years producing nothing. That last requirement is the one Seral's desk never priced in, because it is not a capability. It is a temperament, and services do not model the temperament of their adversaries. They model their equipment. Through 2009, the arrests in Lebanon began to increase, and the increase was noticed at the desk. It could not fail to be noticed, because some of the people being detained sat 1 or 2 removes from assets that were actively being run. The question that arrived on Seral's table was how to read it, and there were 2 readings available. The first was political. Lebanon in 2009 was in a period of ferocious internal maneuvering, and spy arrests are politically useful there in the way corruption prosecutions are useful elsewhere. A security service that produces Israeli collaborators has justified its budget and embarrassed a rival faction in the same press conference. Under that reading, the wave was noise. Marginal collaborators, low-value people, some of them almost certainly innocent, swept up for domestic reasons and paraded. The second reading was that somebody had found a method. The first reading was more comfortable. It was also, and this is the part that makes the failures so difficult to condemn, better supported by the evidence available at the time. Most of the people arrested through 2009 genuinely were marginal. They were not core placements. They were the wide end of the funnel, and if you were looking at that data and hoping to conclude nothing systemic was happening, the data would let you. This is the point in the operation where stopping would have been safer. Not stopping permanently, standing the network down for 6 months, breaking every established pattern, retiring every handset, canceling every recurring location, and treating the second reading as true even though the first reading was better evidenced. That option existed. It was raised in some form, because it is always raised. It was rejected, and the reasons it was rejected are not stupid, which is why they will be the reasons again next time. An asset who goes dark for 6 months is an asset who begins to wonder whether he has been abandoned, and an abandoned man starts making his own arrangements. Placement takes 12 years to build and 1 season to lose. Going quiet means going blind, and going blind in Lebanon in 2009, with Syria deteriorating and the Iranian nuclear file accelerating, meant accepting a certain and immediate intelligence gap in exchange for protection against a threat that might not exist at all. And there was the thing that is never said aloud in a review meeting. If you stand the network down because you suspect a method, and you are right, nobody can prove you saved anything. If you stand it down and you are wrong, you have cost the service 2 years of product on an instinct, and there is a name attached to that decision in a file that people will read. The asymmetry of professional consequence pointed in exactly one direction, and it always does. The network stayed up. But something was done, because doing nothing was intolerable, and what was done is the second cost this operation absorbed without noticing. The desk tightened procedures. Tightening is the instinctive middle path. You do not shut down, and you do not carry on unchanged. You make everybody more careful. Fewer meetings. Cleaner handsets. Narrower contact windows. Stricter enforcement of the rules that had been quietly eroding for 4 years. Read that against the method described a few minutes ago, and you can see what happened, though nobody at the desk could have. The analysts in Beirut were not hunting sloppiness. They were hunting unnatural regularity. When the Israeli side responded to danger by imposing more discipline, it made every asset in the network more statistically distinctive than they had been the month before. The countermeasure fed the attack. And it did something worse than that. It compressed the network in time. Assets who had previously been contacted on staggered, individualized schedules were pulled onto standardized procedures, because standardized procedures are easier to audit and enforce across dozens of officers. Standardization creates correlation. 30 people who had looked like 30 unrelated statistical oddities began, faintly, to resolve into a single anomaly with 30 instances. Now break the assumption this story has been resting on since the first minute, because it is not the one you think. The belief underneath 20 years of Israeli work in Lebanon was never that Hezbollah was stupid. Nobody at that desk believed that after 2006. The belief was subtler, more technical, and far more dangerous. It was that penetration of the communications layer was an asymmetric advantage. Asymmetric means one-directional. I can see you, and you cannot see me. And in the narrow engineering sense, that was entirely true. Israel could read the Lebanese network. Hezbollah could not read Israel's. But information does not travel one way through a shared medium. A network you can watch is a network that records you watching. Every query leaves a residue. Every asset run through that system becomes a permanent data point inside it. Every meeting arranged with the confidence that access provides becomes an entry in a log that belongs to somebody else. The service was not looking through a window into Lebanon. It was standing inside a room, in Lebanon, that Lebanon could eventually search. The penetration was never asymmetric. It was only early. Israel reached the data first and held a lead of some years, and it spent that lead building a human network whose entire physical existence was being written, line by line, into a record the adversary would one day read. The advantage and the vulnerability were not two forces in tension. They were the same object, observed at two different points in time. So the collapse is not an accident. It is a maturity date, set the moment the first asset was run through a system the other side owned, and coming due the instant somebody over there thought to open the ledger, which raises the only question left worth asking. If the debt was always going to be called, who decided the hour, and why did they choose to do it in the dark? The first thing that happened was a mistake, and it happened on the Lebanese side. Somewhere in the second half of 2009, a detention took place that should not have taken place yet. The pattern of the arrests across that period, and the way the later sweep was structured, both point to it. Somebody in the security apparatus, working a case that intersected the analytic project without being part of it, picked up a man who was on the long list. This is the permanent hazard in a country with more than one security service. Lebanon had several, with overlapping mandates, competing patrons, and no incentive to inform each other. An investigation being run patiently by one group can be detonated by another group doing ordinary police work. The man was questioned and, according to the shape of what followed, released. Whether he was released because the case against him was thin, or because somebody made a call to ensure it happened is not established anywhere, and this channel will not pretend to know. What matters is that for a period of weeks, the analytic project stood on the edge of collapse. If that man understood what he had brushed against, and if he told his handler, the entire network would go dark within days, and 3 years of work would produce nothing but a warning delivered to the enemy. He did not tell his handler. Or he told him something so vague that it entered the reporting stream as one more piece of low-grade noise from a nervous asset, which is the most common category of intelligence there is. The near miss did something to the analysts, though. It removed the luxury of unlimited time. Until that point, the project could run indefinitely, adding names, refining the map, waiting for certainty. After it, every additional week of patience carried a live risk that the whole thing would be blown by an accident nobody controlled. That pressure is what produced the near abort, and the near abort came from the wrong direction entirely. The argument inside the counterintelligence effort was not whether to act, it was whether to act on what they had. The map at that point was incomplete. Some names were certain, others were probable. A significant number were inferred, present in the pattern but never confirmed by anything a court or a commander would accept. The case for moving immediately was straightforward. Take the certainties, take them now, accept that the probables escape, and bank a real result before another accident ends the option. The case for waiting was that a partial roll-up is worth almost nothing. Take 5 men on a Monday, and you have warned the remaining 25, and by Wednesday they are in Cyprus. or they are in a room explaining themselves to people who will not let them leave, or they have simply stopped, permanently and untraceably. A roll-up is simultaneous, or it is a leak with arrests attached. They chose to wait, and they waited through a period in which people they knew to be spies continued to be spies, reporting to Israel, causing damage they could have prevented on any given afternoon by making a phone call. That is a decision most organizations are institutionally incapable of making, and it is the single most impressive thing in this entire file. Now cross back to Tel Aviv, because the most consequential thing that happened in the winter of 2009 and the early months of 2010 happened at Sarel's desk, and it was nothing. The arrests slowed. After the surge through 2009, the wave that had prompted the tightening of procedures, the numbers coming out of Lebanon dropped off. Fewer detentions reported in the press, fewer names appearing in the military court lists. Fewer of those uncomfortable moments where somebody 2 removes from an active asset turned up in an Al-Manar broadcast. Consider how that reads from inside the building. 6 months earlier, the desk had faced a decision between 2 interpretations: political theater or a method. It had chosen political theater, kept the network running, and tightened procedures as insurance. Now the arrests had subsided, exactly as a political wave subsides once it has served its purpose. The evidence had arrived, and the evidence said they were right. This is the false release, and it is the most dangerous single moment in the operation, more dangerous than any meeting or any handset, because it is the point at which the correct answer became unreachable. Before the slowdown, the second interpretation was still alive in the room, held by whoever had argued for standing down. After it, that person had been refuted by events. Nobody could raise the question again. It had been asked, decided, and then confirmed by outcome. Every institution treats a resolved question as closed, and reopening one requires either new evidence or a willingness to look foolish, and there was no new evidence. There was also relief, and relief is corrosive in a way that fear is not. The desk had spent months operating with a low-grade dread it could not name, and now the dread had a resolution. The procedures were tighter, the arrests had stopped, and the causal link between those 2 facts was so intuitive that it never needed to be examined. The tightening worked. That is what the desk concluded. That is the incorrect assumption, and it is now going to play out to its end. The arrests had slowed because the collection phase had finished. There was nothing left to sweep at the margins, because the margins had been mapped, and the analysts had moved on to the far harder work of confirming the core. They had stopped generating visible activity because they had stopped needing to. And the tightened procedures, the thing the desk credited for its safety, were at that exact moment the most useful gift the operation had ever given them. 30 handsets that had recently and simultaneously adopted more rigid patterns. 30 behavioral profiles that had shifted in the same direction inside the same 8-week window. Nothing in a national telecommunications dataset looks like that except a network taking cover. So the spring of 2010 arrives with both sides confident, and only one of them correct. On the Israeli side, the file is in a good state. The network is intact. Product is flowing. The security scare of the previous year has been handled, and handled by a middle path that cost nothing, which is the most seductive outcome any decision can produce. Sarel's desk is not complacent. It is something worse, which is vigilant about the wrong thing. There are reviews in this period. There always are. Somebody will have looked at contact schedules and asked whether the intervals were adequate, whether the locations had been rotated, whether the handset replacement cycle was being observed. Every one of those questions is about whether the assets are being disciplined enough. Not one of them is about whether discipline is what is killing them. Because that question requires standing outside the frame the desk lives inside, and nobody in a building can do that on a Tuesday afternoon in the middle of ordinary work. On the other side, the list is closing. The final phase of a project like this is not analysis. It is logistics. You are no longer asking who, You are asking how many teams, how many vehicles, which addresses at which hours, who is traveling and who is not, which of these men lives alone and which will require managing a family in a doorway at 4 in the morning. That planning takes months, and it generates its own risk, because the more people who know the target list, the higher the chance somebody talks, which is why in the last weeks the tempo becomes brutal and the window shrinks. There is a specific quality to those final weeks that is worth sitting with. Both sides are working normally. Assets are making contact on schedule and reporting what they see. Handlers are logging it and passing it up. Product is being distributed to consumers in Tel Aviv who have no idea they are reading the last of it. Sharbel Qazi, according to the case Lebanese authorities would later bring, is going to work at Alpha. He has been going to work at Alpha for a very long time. He is a senior engineer with a career and colleagues and a routine, and he has spent years inside the most valuable position any human being has occupied in that country on Israel's behalf. Weeks from now he will be arrested, and a second engineer named Tarek Rabah will be arrested shortly after him, and both will be charged with spying for Israel, and Lebanon's telecommunications network will be publicly named as the wound. But not yet. Right now he is at his desk, doing his job, in a building that logs everything. And a date has been chosen that he does not know about, by people whose existence he has never suspected, for reasons of operational readiness rather than symbolism. The consequences did not begin on the night. They began 4 weeks before it, and nobody on either side experienced them as consequences. Every report that flowed out of the Lebanon network in the final month was written by a person who was already condemned. That product went up the chain, was assessed, was distributed to consumers who acted on it, and was filed as current intelligence from a live source. It was none of those things. It was the last output of a machine that had already been dismantled in every way except mechanically. Some of that final reporting may have been shaped. An adversary who owns a target list weeks before executing it possesses a period in which it can allow specific things to be seen. There is no public evidence that this was done in Lebanon, and this channel is not going to assert it. But the window existed, and services that reach that position have historically used it. Then the arrests, and then the part of this story that is hardest to convey, which is that nothing happened. The first missed contact windows were logged as routine, because they were routine. Assets miss contacts. They get sick, they travel, they get frightened. They have an argument with a wife who has started asking where the money comes from. A missed window generates a note, not an alarm. The second round produced concern at the working level and a set of entirely ordinary explanations at the level above it. Each case officer knew that 2 or 3 of their people had gone quiet. Each of them had a plausible reason for each one, because plausible reasons are always available. Somewhere in the 3rd or 4th week, somebody finally did the thing that should have been done immediately, which was to lay every missed contact across a single timeline instead of tracking them inside separate files. Compartmentation, the discipline built specifically to prevent one man from betraying the network, delayed the detection of the network's destruction by close to a month. No individual officer could see the whole. The structure that made betrayal impossible also made comprehension impossible, and both of those properties came from the same design decision. When the timeline was finally assembled, it did not require interpretation. 30 people, unconnected to one another, spread across the country, recruited in different decades by different officers, from different professions and different confessional communities, had all ceased operational existence inside the same short window. There is no innocent reading of that shape. A service that sees it knows 3 things instantly. It has been rolled up. The roll-up was systematic, and whatever produced it is still running right now. What it does not know is which of the 3 possible causes was responsible, and the investigation that followed almost certainly began with the wrong one. Services always begin with the mole hypothesis, because the search for a traitor locates the failure inside a person rather than inside a doctrine, and a person can be removed. There was no traitor. Nothing in this operation required one. The mole hunt itself is a cost that is never counted properly. It consumes months, poisons a desk, ends careers of people who did nothing, and produces a period during which the organization is looking inward at exactly the moment it most needs to be looking outward at the method that beat it. And through all of it, there was nothing to be done for the people themselves, not because of a failure of will. Because there is no mechanism. You cannot negotiate. Because you do not officially exist in that country and there is no counterparty with any reason to deal. You cannot extract, because extraction requires knowing where a person physically is, and these people were in facilities whose locations were unknown, and in some cases whose existence was not acknowledged. You cannot protest diplomatically. Because the state receiving the protest is either the state making the arrests or a state with no ability to influence the organization making them. Some of the detainees from this period went through Lebanese military courts and received sentences, and their names entered the press and their families at least knew where they were. Those, in the arithmetic of this file, were the fortunate ones. Convictions in those courts have been criticized for decades by human rights organizations and should be treated as contested. Others appeared nowhere. The promise made to every one of those people at recruitment, the promise that there was a way out, was not a lie when it was made. It was a conditional that nobody wrote down as a liability. It came due on a single night, 30 times over, and the service discovered that it had been insolvent on that debt for 15 years without ever recording it. Israel lost roughly 2 decades of accumulated placement and did not recover equivalent access for years. It lost that visibility at the worst possible moment, immediately before Hezbollah became a combatant in Syria and transformed into a substantially more capable military organization than the one that had fought in 2006. The telecommunications advantage was gone permanently, in the sense that the vulnerability was identified, publicized, and closed. Every subsequent attempt at that class of penetration has had to work against an adversary that now knows precisely what to look for and has institutional memory of finding it once. Doctrine shifted, though no document announcing the shift has ever been published. The old model was patient and human. You place a person and you leave them for 15 years and you accept that most of that time produces nothing. That model is only rational if the probability of catastrophic simultaneous loss stays low, and Lebanon demonstrated that in a country with mature counterintelligence and a comprehensive digital record, that probability approaches certainty over a long enough horizon. So the weight moved toward shorter operations. Assets recruited for a defined task and released. Technical collection that does not require a human being to physically stand anywhere. Penetrations designed from the beginning to be disposable, on the assumption they will be found rather than permanent, on the assumption they will not. And underneath all of it, the harder lesson about signature. If discipline is detectable, then the objective can no longer be to be disciplined. It has to be ordinary, to deliberately generate the mess a normal life generates, at cost. Because a clean signal inside a dirty environment is the easiest thing in the world to find. Whether that lesson was absorbed or merely restated is genuinely unclear, because in November of 2011, Hezbollah went on Al-Manar and broadcast the identities of undercover CIA officers working in Lebanon, using animated reconstructions of meetings that had taken place at ordinary commercial locations in Beirut. American reporting confirmed the Beirut network had been substantially unraveled, and noted that case officers had met informants at the same locations more than once. And the same reporting recorded that senior CIA officials had already been warned to take particular care in Lebanon, specifically because Lebanese and Hezbollah authorities had arrested scores of Israeli spies in 2009. The warning existed. It named the correct threat in the correct city, citing the correct precedent. It was delivered, and it did not work, because organizations learn from their own losses and are constitutionally unable to learn from somebody else's. 2 of the most capable services on Earth walked into the same trap in the same city inside 24 months. When that happens, the variable is not the services. It is the ground. Be precise about the man we called Searle, because the ending most people want is a villain, and there is not one available here. He did not lose the network through negligence. Every tradecraft relaxation was individually defensible, approved through proper process, and justified by a technical advantage that genuinely existed. He did not ignore the warnings. He weighed two interpretations, chose the one better supported by the evidence in front of him, and was wrong. He did not fail to react. He tightened procedures, which is the textbook response, and the textbook response fed the attack directly. The failure was never in a decision. It was in the frame that generated all of them, which held that the service was the observer and Lebanon was the observed. That frame was correct when he inherited it. It expired somewhere around 2007, and there was no mechanism anywhere in the organization designed to notice when a foundational assumption quietly stops being true. He would have faced an internal inquiry. Findings would have been written. Careers moved sideways rather than ended, because in this business they always do. The desk was restructured and staffed with people who correctly understood that their predecessors had made an error, and who went on to make a different one. What he permanently lost was not a network. It was the ability to make the promise. Every officer who sat in that chair afterward knew, in a way that could no longer be abstracted, exactly what that assurance is worth on the night it is tested. And this case did not arrive from nowhere. It sits at the end of a long lineage of network-building doctrine. The practice of placing local assets inside a hostile state and leaving them there for a generation, which produced Israel's greatest successes and every one of its worst collapses. The cases that built that doctrine are not in any public file. Some of them are in the ebook linked in the description below, which goes through the recruitment cycle case by case, the specific counterintelligence methods that have destroyed Israeli networks, and what happened to the people left behind in each one. The link is in the description. If you have watched this far, tell us in the comments which decision in this file you think was actually avoidable, because we could not find one.